Okay, I'm here to talk about what we can do with this national credit, where we can direct it into infrastructure, because that is really the key thing in building a physical economy. Now, here you see a slide of the New Citizen newspaper that we issued in April of 2006. That's actually a reissue of the original Infrastructure Road to Recovery report that we put out in February of 2002. So we've been long on the record of pushing for infrastructure. And that's the special report in that New Citizen paper. Let's build our way out of the depression, because it is a depression, it's not a recession, it's an actual physical economic depression in the real economy. Now, we're told that we're suffering a population explosion, and that's the reason why we've got an infrastructure problem. You know, we're stuck in traffic jams, we've had all sorts of issues with infrastructure, such as, I know we've had water restrictions, all sorts of issues, electricity, blackouts and brownouts. It's because we've got too many people, isn't it? That's what we're told. You know, we're just inundated with so many people. Well, I downloaded the official statistics on Australia's population from the Bureau of Statistics, and if you look at it year by year, if you look at it, the percentage growth from one year to the next, I downloaded it into an Excel sheet and worked out what percentage growth you had from one year to the next year to the next year. Now, this goes back to 1860. And at that time, in the 1860s and 1870s, 1880s, thereabouts, our population growth was around about 4% per year. Every year, the population was 4% more than the previous year, thereabouts. And now, go all the way along to 2017 is the latest data I have. Our population growth is sitting around about 1.5%. Now that's what we're told, but we're being inundated by all these people and we've got a population explosion. That's the problem for the infrastructure. Well, it's not true. The data shows it's not true. And if you look at the actual periods where we had population decline, the worst decline we had was in World War I, where I had to include a negative. The zero line sits a couple of lines up. So in World War I, we actually lost people, tragically. Too many thousands of people died in World War I. In the 1890s depression, we saw a decline before then. And then the Great Depression, another decline. World War II, in that period of the Great Depression, World War II, population growth was sitting below 1%. After World War II, population, we had the baby boom. There was a lot of excitement. We were growing the economy. We actually were doing some good things back then. We were building infrastructure, which I'll obviously come to. But the point is that in the good times, we had population growth and we were building infrastructure to keep up, not just keep up with that growth, but to plan for the future. And that's what we need to do. We had the 1970s oil crisis, population collapse. The early 1990s recession, population collapse. So we've gone up a little bit, but it's nothing. In the big scheme of things, our population growth is nothing. And here's a map that we put in the New Citizen back in that 2006 report of depopulation in rural Australia. And you see the colours there, the darker the colour, the more the depopulation. So in a good part of Australia, we've actually had population loss. The areas are white are where we had some gain, but there's a huge number of areas and this was back in the 1980s to 2000. I believe it's worse now. So we need to build infrastructure so we can plan for future population, not this catch-up mode or falling behind. And we used to do it right. back in those days, in the post-war era, post-World War II, we built grand things such as the Snowy Mountain scheme. Has anyone been to Chimit 3 there? That's Chimit 3 of the Snowy Mountain scheme? Yeah. Show of hands? Yeah. A few? Yeah. So that's inspiring infrastructure. That supplies electricity. Just 2 of those long pipes would supply enough electricity to power the whole of Canberra. Just 2 of them.
Oh, get rid of them
then. And those 6 pipes, the 6 pipes of Chimit 3, they're 487 metres long, 5.6 metres in diameter. Collectively, they contain 10,260 tonnes of steel. There's just a few people standing right at the bottom of one. You probably recognise me there, I'm on the right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so as I say, we used to have grand visionaries and great engineers. John Bradfield is one of them. He designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now, back in those days, this is a massive project. I mean, it was actually the widest long-span bridge at 48.8 metres wide, and it has retained that record up until 2012, just a few years ago, when the Port Mann Bridge in Vancouver was completed. But up until that point, it was the widest long-span bridge. Today, that would be considered, that's just overindulging. When they built the Balti Bridge here in Melbourne, it has 2 spans of 15 metres. It's built for Transurban toll road. So they weren't thinking about future population growth. It's just about making money, cash cow. Back then, that was planning for the future development of Sydney. Want to come to water infrastructure. We have enormous potential in water infrastructure. Most of our agriculture is in the Murray-Darling Basin, and yet only 6.1% of the rainfall falls on that Murray-Darling Basin there. We've got three massive basins in the north there. You'll see the Northeast Coast Division there, 21.1%, the Gulf of Carpentaria Division, 23.3%, the Timor Sea Division, 20.3%, 3 massive basins, virtually untapped, virtually unused. And then you've got the Southeast Coast Division, which is significant, even much bigger than the Murray-Darling Basin at 10.6%, and that's where you'd have the Clarence River scheme, which would divert some of that into the Murray-Darling Basin, which we'll come to that. Professor Lance Endersby had some great ideas in building water infrastructure and transport infrastructure, which we'll come to. But I had the great pleasure, and a lot of us here had the great pleasure of meeting Lance and working with him over many years. He wrote a book here, Voyage of Discovery, which is available at the book test over there. He collaborated with the Citizens Electoral Council from 1997 onwards for many years until his passing. He was the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority engineer. He worked with the Tasmanian Hydro. He's the Dean of Engineering and Vice Chancellor at Monash University, World Authority on rock tunnelling, and he's proposed a fast freight railway and the Australian Ring Railway irrigation schemes. And the New Citizen Special Report that I've just referenced wasn't possible without collaboration with Lance, and we had many meetings to discuss these projects. This is one of Lance's proposals, the Clarence River scheme. It will be on the scale of the Snowy Mountain scheme, and the idea is to divert the waters of the Clarence Rivers and the rivers aside that area over the Great Dividing Range, pump it uphill into dams up in the high country, and then it would generate hydroelectricity as the water flows down the other side. So that would utilise a lot of the electricity which is generated, when they did have, back at that time when they had coal-fired power stations, we're shutting them down pretty fast right now, but they had surplus coal-fired power which was running 24 hours a day. That could be used to store energy in the dams and at peak periods generate electricity running down the other side. You could equally use nuclear power for the same process, but it's a storage, it's a big storage in the terms of potential energy of water falling, and not to mention the irrigation potential. I'll just read out a quote from Professor Enderby on this that he gave to our conference in 1997, 23rd of November conference. Lance said, there is a catchment of the Clarence River and it is a wonderful little cup in there, very steep high country, high rainfall, and one of the highest rainfall areas in Australia. And they get the summer rains from the monsoons coming down and they get the winter rains as well. So there is a lot of rainfall there and it all flows out to sea. And if you've been to Grafton, you'll know how wide the river is, the Clarence River is at Grafton. It is a big river. So I've worked out and designed a scheme for the division of the Clarence into the Darling. Now, you know there's a lot of algae in the Darling. This would flush out all the algae out of the Darling. I've designed this as a pump storage scheme. There is a surplus of thermal energy, coal-fired and thermal energy from the Hunter and Latrobe Valley, and there is a surplus of thermal energy on the national grid, and the national grid just goes right down there, just through there, past the project. So I knew that there was a surplus of thermal energy overnight and at weekends, and so with this Clarence diversion, rather than tunnelling through the mountains, I could pump it uphill, and so I've devised the scheme whereby we pump overnight and at weekends, and we generate at peak times on the way down the hill. The project is economic. Now another scheme which has long been on the drawing boards, the Bradfield scheme, designed by the same engineer who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Massive scheme that would divert the waters of the Tully, Herbert and Burdekin rivers up in Queensland there, over the Great Dividing Range, and that will end up flowing all the way through to Lake Eyre eventually, but open up massive irrigation areas, open up Australia. At the direction of the Queensland State Government in 1984, the Bradfield Study Consortium was started. The consortium report was never actually officially released due to a change of government in Queensland. But in July 1993, all the relevant Shire councils of North and Central Queensland joined together to form the Northern Australian Water Development Council to fight to make Bradfield's dream a reality. The estimated cost of the revised Bradfield scheme, which called for pumping water over the Great Dividing Range instead of tunnelling through it, originally foreseen by Bradfield, among other changes, was at that time $2.49 billion. If only we invested those $2.5 billion. I mean, that's nothing really. And the amount that would, or the amount you'd return, you get a return on. Yep.
That Hell's Gate Dam's the one that Bob Catt has just got an agreement for.
That's right. So the Hell's Gate Dam is part of the Bradfield scheme. Obviously, just building that alone is useful, but much better to tap that water and utilise it over on the west side of the Great Dividing Range as well. Yeah, that's what I want. Another scheme, the Reid scheme, would divert a lot of the waters from the Gulf of Carpentaria via a canal, and that canal would send the water eventually down to Lake Eyre, but open up massive areas all throughout Queensland. The scheme would include 275 kilometres of canal, 84 metres wide by 11 metres deep, and 17 kilometres of tunnelling to go through some of the range. Massive reservoir there, bound by the Gregory Range. And that green section there is a lot of pipes. Massive volumes of water. One of the dams there would be 19 kilometres long along the Gregory Range. It would have a lot of little dams capturing the water along that canal all the way along from the Walsh River, the Tate River, the Lynd, all those rivers along there. And they'd just keep tapping a little bit more of the floodwaters as it goes along. So that's designed by a great engineer who most people had never heard of, Lewis Reed. Now getting on to transport infrastructure. This is one of Professor Endersby's proposals, the Asian Express. This would open access to markets that we couldn't even think about today because a lot of goods are perishable and there's no way we could have goods going on a ship all the way around the coast and getting up to Asia several weeks or months later, they'd be off. But you could have a high-speed train going up to a national port in Darwin, high-speed shipping ferries, get perishable goods such as fresh fruit and vegetables into Asian markets. Professor Endersby proposed a great project. So really we should be moving to maglev rather than the conventional rail, and we could use maglev on Lance's proposal. Maglev already exists. This is one in China that goes from Shanghai to Pudong Airport. That train is in regular operation, maximum operating speed 431 kilometres an hour. So certainly that's been going for many years now, I think about a decade or so. So that's what we should be moving towards. Better still, vacuum maglev that we've been pushing for several years. Now it's becoming a reality worldwide. You don't hear a lot about it on the news, but that is an actual test tube. That's the Hyperloop 1 tube, which is out in the Nevada desert there. It's got to be dead straight because you have high-speed transport whizzing through these tubes, and they'll be in a vacuum or semi-vacuum, which will reduce the air resistance. And that means you can go at incredible speeds, faster than aeroplanes. That is the future of transport. You'll see the aeroplanes go the way of the horse and cart because those transport vehicles will be moving along at potentially several thousand kilometres an hour. Well, that's the test track there. It's up there, been under construction in Nevada. This is the latest passenger capsule that Hyperloop has just unveiled. It's only just happened a few weeks ago.
What's the view like?
Yeah, the view would be very blurry. And there's a proposal to have one up and running in the United Arab Emirates very soon. I believe, according to the UAE National, they reported the first full-scale passenger capsule was unveiled in southern Spain this week, and Abu Dhabi now seems set to open a commercial section of the track next year. So imagine that whizzing through a tube at 1,000 k's an hour, so, or more, depending on how long the distances are. And we've had a long record in pushing this. That's our new citizen newspaper that we put out in 2011, Australia Go Vacuum Maglev. And at that stage we're calling for the possibility of building one right across the Nullarbor Plain. So incredible potential there. Move on to what we're going to power all this with. It's not going to happen with a few little wind turbines. That doesn't work very well. South Australia has proven that electricity prices are going through the roof for that so-called renewables experiment. Nuclear power can be done safely, and if you look worldwide, there's an enormous growth in nuclear power. You have a look at the number of reactors under construction, 54 reactors under construction presently worldwide. I've just circled in red there. 148 planned, 337 proposed, and in China alone, there's 136 reactors proposed. Whether people like nuclear power or not, it's going ahead in a big way, driven mainly by China and a few other countries, but there's several countries. So big the list that I couldn't even put them all in there. I just cut a bit out there. You can see that jagged line. And this is world uranium production is growing. Just to give you a sense that nuclear power is growing worldwide. We would sooner go thorium or better still fusion, but uranium can be done safely with the newest nuclear reactors. But the problem is Australia is rejecting all this. Our uranium production's dropped. We're not even using it ourselves, and that's our production dropping. We're not even using it. So we've got to really change our tune on that if we want to stay ahead. Finally, space. If we want a science driver, we need to invest in space technologies. If you look at the Apollo program, a lot of people criticise it, putting man on the moon. Why would you want to do that? Too expensive. But for every dollar spent on the Apollo program, United States received an estimated $9 in benefits from new technologies in return. And certainly we can do a similar thing here. We have done in the past. We've had incredible space technologies here, but we've turned our back on that, and we need to push ahead on that. So I could say a lot more, but I think my time's run out. So we'll leave it at that.